we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. Thanks everybody for joining us for our Little Lunch lecture today. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Stephanie Boret. I'm the Director of Donor Relations for the Coastal Land Trust. Thanks again for joining us. Okay, first a few announcements. So we are recording, and if you do not want to have your video, or if you have kids with you, if you don't want their video on YouTube, please take your video off and then you won't be recorded. I have added a couple of links in the chat. You can copy and paste if you want to sign up for our e-news or find out more information about our future Little Lunch lectures. We'll keep everybody muted during the talk, and at the end there will be time for questions and answers, and at that time you can unmute and ask a question, or you can type it into the chat and we'll be looking at the chat to see those as well. Okay, so I could talk for a very long time about the incredible accomplishments of Ann and Bland Simpson, but this is a little lecture, so I cannot be very exhaustive right now. But suffice to say, Bland Simpson is Kenan Distinguished Professor of English and Creative Writing at UNC Chapel Hill. He has also been the Red Clay Ramblers piano player since 1986 and has written many literary and musical works. Several are award-winning. Ann Carey Simpson is a nonprofit consultant with Moss and Russ and has long been a champion for the environment and for conservation, serving in leadership roles with organizations including, but not limited to, North Carolina Catch, the Nature Conservancy, North Carolina Environmental Defense Fund, and as just past president of the Coastal Land Trust. Ann and Bland will share with us today some bits and bobs from Little Rivers and Waterway Tales, which is just one of the many works that they have published jointly. Ann and Bland, to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. I'm going to read a couple of sentences from the introduction to our book, Little Rivers and Waterway Tales, and then Ann will lead us through a selection of her photographs that went into, a number of which went into this book.
And I will warn you, this is the cover photograph from the book, Little Rivers and Waterway Tales, and it is the only color photograph that we have. If you know the work that we've done together, it has, to date at least, been mostly black and white photographs. So that is what follows.
Little rivers lace the terraced flats of Carolina East, flowing slowly, most of them, past low bluffs and high, through swamp forests great and small to the big streams and sounds. They flow slowly, too, through the golden marshes of autumn, and on through them yet again in the bright green up of spring, and through farmlands putting forth in summertime and fall, past snows of cotton and wealths of soybeans, flowering tobacco and cucumber fields, where deer graze thickly by the score by night, cornfields where the bear may sometimes appear for solitary sunset feasts. Many of our little rivers are so close to the coast, they have little fall and are just about as easy to float up as down. Yet others, just a tad farther inland, know the full, real power of gradient and of changeable nature and of big rains of a night that may send torrents of new water down them like logs rushing down a flume. Fresh new water that cannot wait to get to the old, to the sounds, the salt, and the sea.
All right, so we're going to take you on a journey from the northeastern part of the state, you'll have to keep this in your mind, all the way down to the sea at Wrightsville Beach. And we're starting on the upper Pasquotank River, where it flows just below South Mills and comes down towards Elizabeth City. And this part of the Pasquotank fascinated us because it's swamp forest close in with lots of duckweed pattern on the water in the summertime. And then as you move farther down the river, it broadens out into a wide estuary at Elizabeth City, where it became the perfect place for a historic regatta called the Mothboat Regatta, which started in 1929. And these are some of the mothboats. We were fortunate enough to see one of the races before we published this book, so we got them in there. You want to say a little bit about the boat?
Yeah, this is a wonderful boat. It was designed by a captain whose big sailboat was laid up for repairs, and he couldn't think of anything other to do than design a new kind of boat. It's peculiar initially to the Albemarle and Chesapeake, but now it's all over the world, and it is even an Olympic event. The Australians put hydrofoils on the classic mothboat and made it into quite something else. But this is Elizabeth City.
Yeah, it's Elizabeth City, and this was the champion of the day, Joe Bosquet. He was so funny. He's a great boater. He's won this multiple times, I think, and he saw us in a boat with a camera and whipped his boat around and came right in towards us so we could get a good shot of him. But he's a wonderful guy. It's a fun thing to go take a look at if you're in Elizabeth City. See if you can time it for the mothboat regattas. So we're moving down the coast a little bit now to the Scuppernong River, which is near Pungo Lake and Somerset Plantation. And this is a turning basin at one of the boat launches on the Scuppernong. It was widened out historically so that sailing vessels could come way up the Scuppernong River and meet canals that were coming out of Pungo Lake. Phelps Lake, I'm sorry, Phelps Lake. Canals that were dug by slaves on the big plantations that were up around the lakes. And these canals allowed the goods from the plantations to come down to the boat landing where they could be loaded onto these large ships. And then with the help of mules and boats, these ships could turn around and go back down the Scuppernong.
Yeah, these typically would have been 60, 70 foot, two-masted schooners. And, this is the head of navigation. This is at Sproul's Bridge near Creswell. And it's about 18 miles down to Columbia and where the Scuppernong broadens into Bulls Bay and goes on into the Albemarle Sound from the south side.
Okay. And as we go down towards Bulls Bay, we take a stop at the Little Alligator River. This is near Columbia, and we met up with our friends Willie and Feather Phillips here. Willie owns a seafood company in Columbia, and Feather is the creator and founder of Pasquotank Arts, which is a wonderful Eastern craft school that you should take a look at online when you get a chance. But Feather and Willie wanted to take us down the Alligator along these Pasquotank swamplands to show us a particular thing that had sort of confused them over the years. And they wanted us to see if we could find out more about it.
And so we did. We pulled over in the shad boat that Willie was piloting there. He said it's a grave out in the water. And we got him to pull in close enough that Ann could get some good shots of the marker. It looks like a grave, but in fact, it's a patent. It's a claim by Josiah Collins for 60,000 acres set at Miller's Landing, which is now called Ludford Landing, on the south side of the Little Alligator River. And he's claiming a huge amount of property that the state granted him in the late 1790s. He's the builder of Somerset Plantation, and his son and grandson carried it on after him. This marker was not built into or put into the river. It was on dry land a little over 2 centuries ago. And so now it's a marker of sea level rise because it's about 50 feet out into the Little Alligator River from the south side there. So this is a very important marker, not for why it was put there, but for what it's telling us today.
The cautionary tale.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to take you across the Big Pamlico River from Little Alligator, Big Pamlico Sound, I'm sorry, from the Little Alligator over to Ocracoke. And you might not have often seen a look at the Ocracoke light from this angle. This is taken from the top of the Castle Inn that's on the harbor at Ocracoke, as is this photograph. And we wanted to say something about the harbor because some of you, if you've been to Ocracoke, might have heard Silver Lake here called the Creek. And there's a story behind that.
Well, this was a creek. It was Cockle Creek. And it was dug out by the Corps of Engineers in the 1930s, and just a few years later, it was redug by the U.S. Navy so that larger vessels could get in there during World War II. and it's generally known as Silver Lake, but the Ocracokers will all call it, to a man and woman, the creek.
And now you know the history behind it. You can be in the know when you go to Ocracoke.
Call it the creek.
Now we know, since a lot of you are connected with the Land Trust and have been supporters, you know a lot about Springer's Point. So we thought we might show you some places on Ocracoke that, besides Springer's Point, that you've seen a lot of pictures of. Ocracoke is really well known for its broad expanses of marshland that go out to little hammocks. Like this is a Quox hammock that we're walking out to, where some friends of ours had a boat landing. There are these beautiful little live oak and cedar and brush islands dotted all over the marshes in Ocracoke. And one of the things that I really appreciate about what the Land Trust has been doing over the years is protecting these marshes and the forest land around it, so that we're protecting water quality for ourselves when we go swimming, but also for the fishing industry. And on Ocracoke, the fishing industry historically was the main thing that kept the community sustained. And now there's one fish house left on Ocracoke that was preserved by the Ocracoke Foundation and the Ocracoke Working Watermen's Association. The land was up for sale. There was a speculator who was interested in putting some condos on that location, and the watermen said, if this fish house goes, there's no fishing in Ocracoke. We have to take our fish to Hatteras to sell it. So the Ocracoke Foundation and the Working Watermen's Association got together, and fortunately there's still a functioning fish house on Ocracoke, so you can buy fish in their retail store, which is really nice. But getting back to habitats, we wanted to take you a little bit farther up the beach on Ocracoke and into the National Seashore Park, where we took a walk through some dunes to go back to a forest. And on the way, Bland and I saw something we have never seen, even though we both grew up on the coast and have spent a lot of time there. We've never seen mushrooms growing on dunes, but we saw fields of mushrooms.
Huge fields.
And these are specific dune mushrooms we've found out, which was just such a surprise to us, as was going over the dunes and towards the sound and seeing this beautiful live oak forest that's tucked back off the beaten path in the Seashore Park. And if you've been to Springer's Point, this will be reminiscent for you of the live oaks that are throughout that beautiful preserve. So keep going. All right. Now we're taking you farther down the coast. You've taken the ferry back across the Sound and come down to Carteret County. And this is Carrot Island, right off the coast of Beaufort. A lot of you might be familiar with this. It's known as the Rachel Carson Estuarine Research Reserve, which is a accretion of 5 islands and several shoals that comprise 2,300 acres right off of Beaufort. And these ponies are rather famous in the lore of North Carolina. As a matter of fact, in the newsletter here, there's a picture of the Shackelford ponies, which are relations of the Carrot Island ponies. There's a lot of lore about these ponies being shipwrecked by Spanish galleons and things, but actually they were put there in 1940 by some of the townspeople to graze for free.
Where this is, folks, is between Taylor's Creek and the Sound behind Shackelford. This is a piece of the Deep Creek tidal flat, and that's where Rachel Carson did a great deal of work. And you can read her own reports about it. She's got 10, 15 pages on this very area in her book, The Edge of the Sea.
So moving on, also in Carteret County, and another surprising thing for someone who grew up in the county and had never encountered it, we're out on Adams Creek, which is north of Carrot Island. We're looking here from Adams Creek out towards the Neuse River on the horizon there. And this was the brickwork remains of a lumber mill.
In the late 19th century and very early 20th century, the John Roper Lumber Company of Norfolk and many other cities colonized eastern North Carolina and had planing mills all over the place. There are about 24 of them. New Bern, this one is almost at the mouth of this ruin of a planing mill, almost at the mouth of Adams Creek. We're looking out north toward the Neuse River right there, almost over toward Oriental. And this ruin was an enormous, enormous thing. It had a full-size train that went out on these are supports for the old train track, we believe, went out to pick up logs that were brought in, either tugged in rafts or brought in on barges to come to the mill. Quite a thing, nothing but ruins now.
Right. Nearby is Lucan's Island, Lucan's Cemetery here on the South River Bluff, so looking out towards South River. Lucan's was a village. No one lives there now, but the cemetery is still tended and has just a beautiful view out over the river. Nice place to be for your final resting place. And as you can see, there's the old wooden markers in here as well as the newer markers.
This is about 10 miles due east of where we were just looking at that old mill. And this is all a bit to the north of Beaufort.
And then further down over towards Swansboro, we did take a trip on the White Oak River. Beautiful, beautiful Blackwater river that goes into a wide estuary. And we wanted to just say something about some of the perils of taking photographs from small boats in small rivers. You can see all of the tall rushes on the side of the river here. Occasionally, we'll be going on a photographic trip, and in our small boat, all we see when we look up are shrubs or grasses, and I think, what are we going to take a picture of on this river? But invariably, you go around a corner and a vista like this will open up where the river's clear, looking out towards the forest, and the old duck blind on the side was just wonderful. We also occasionally will run across something like this, which to us, this tree we anthropomorphized into the walking man, the striding man. As we passed by it, it looked for all the world like a giant just striding along the edge of the water. So sometimes we get to see lots of fun things. Another fun thing farther down the coast on the Lumber River, here we're looking down the Lumber, is a structure called McLean Castle that some friends told us about during our book research. She said, I'm from Lumberton, you gonna do something on McLean Castle? And we've never heard of that. So as we knew we wanted to do something on the lumber, but McLean Castle was an interesting feature to wrap this chapter around.
It's hardly a castle, it's a cabin. It looks like a log cabin, but it's concrete that was artistically striated to resemble logs. It was built by the late Governor Angus McLean's widow in the late 1930s, obviously as a playground. And these days it would be called a folly.
And part of the folly are these waterworks you can see in the foreground here. We were not lucky enough to see them full of water with the fountains going and everything full, but the waterworks completely enveloped this house and were diverted from the river. It had lots of tabby, as you can see in the background. The bridge is a tabby bridge, which is concrete with oyster shells in it. And there were fountains made of tabby. It was quite a showplace, I'm sure, in its heyday. Now, further down on our journey, or over, we get to the Black River, which many of you may know is famous for cypress trees that are thousands and thousands of years old. We were lucky enough to get into the Three Sisters Swamp, which I was glad had this detour sign on one of the trees because I got totally turned around and probably wouldn't have gotten out without a little help from the signage back in the swamp. But tell a little about that.
Yeah, you might not expect such fine signage in the midst of a swamp, but Three Sisters, if you haven't been there, is quite a thing, and I know of no other formation like it in the coastal plain. The Black River takes in the Great Kahari and the south, not the south we were looking at a minute ago, and flows north to south down to the Cape Fear River, which it hits 14 miles above Wilmington. It is an enormous natural formation. The Black River above it is about 50 to 75 yards wide. It spreads out to a mile wide for a north-south length of about 10 miles. And then it cinches, just as miraculously, it cinches right back up to 60, 80 yards wide and flows on toward the Cape Fear.
So a little farther down towards Wilmington and the Cape Fear, it broadens out and is dotted with lots of little islands, swamp islands like this one, and flows on out towards Wrightsville Beach. And this brings us to the ocean and a story of unusual house moving.
The North Carolina Coastal Federation that I've worked with for a long time was offered a headquarters. A group that had bought this property on Banks Channel, knew we were looking for a Southeast regional headquarters. They offered us this house. It's called a cottage, but it's no cottage like I knew in Kitty Hawk. It's a big house. And they said, the catch is you got to move it. The second catch is you got to move it by water because it won't fit over the bridge out here on Harbor Island on the way to Wrightsville. So we, the Coastal Federation, employed the expert house movers of Virginia Beach, Virginia, to do the job. And we had total faith in them because they're the ones that moved the Hatteras Lighthouse back 2,900 feet from the Atlantic Ocean back in 1999. And here they are bringing the barge in with this house over on Lee's Cut.
And here's just a note on the value of open space. Along this waterfront here, it's completely built up. You can see the houses stretching back in the distance. There was one vacant lot along this stretch where they were able to bring this barge in and pull the house off on the vacant lot and then take it about a mile down the road around to the Wrightsville Beach Government Center, where it went across a swale that the company bridged here and moved back onto its final pilings to join a little group of historic cottages that are back there and are now museums. And so the Coastal Federation, a sister environmental organization to the Land Trust, has its Southeast Center now on Wrightsville Beach.
And it's named the Fred and Alice Standback Environmental Education Center after the wonderful benefactors and philanthropists who have supported so many environmental organizations across North Carolina, have been so important to the progressive environmental movement in our state.
And so that takes us to the ocean and the end of our journey. So thank you for coming along with us. If there are any questions, we'd be glad to answer some.
What boats did you use?
What boats?
Yes.
A variety. Our fleet was varied. Everything from kayaks to old John boat on the South River. We used the Coastal Federation's 24-foot bateau to go from the Dramtree landing there in Wilmington all the way up to the borough on the Black River. So we used our canoe to go into the Three Sisters swamp, and it depended.
Mm-hmm.
We don't own all those boats, but but we've been very lucky to friends and fellow travelers have been very good about generous about loaning us small craft.
And we did learn a valuable lesson taking the Coastal Federation's boat up the Black River, because it had rained quite a bit upstate in the several days before we went. And as we went up the river and under a railroad trestle, we had about, I would say, a foot of clearance under that trestle as we went up. By the time we came back down a few hours later, we had like 4 inches of clearance. And I was worried that we were going to be paying for a new T-top for that boat. But we got it, we did it.
When you guys were talking about Ocracoke Island, you said hammocks. And I know that there's like a hammock state park, but I'm not really familiar. Can you say more about what hammocks are?
Well, they're really essentially islands or islets. And
in a marsh.
Yeah, in a marsh typically. I mean, you probably wouldn't refer to a sandbar island as a hammock, but you know, there's some places called hammocks back in the Dismal Swamp. They don't have to be, you know, out near a sea beach or a Soundside beach, which that one we were Quox Hammock is.
But it's just a little bit of highland in a marsh, mostly, that's grown live oaks and pines and myrtle bushes and things like that. But it's great habitat, especially for birds, for rookeries. We visited a heron and egret rookery on Carrot Island not too long ago. It's a hammock, and it protects the birds and the nests from predators because it's kind of sitting out there in the marsh by itself. And so anything that wants to prey on the baby birds has to swim out there or walk across the marsh. So.
Cool. What other questions do we have for Ann and Bland about the tour they just took us on through Eastern North Carolina?
Oh, there's a Simpson.
There's a Carrie Simpson.
There's another Simpson raising her hand.
What is your favorite trip that you've taken? Which waterway?
Is this Carrie Simpson speaking?
Yes.
This is the Carrie Simpson, at least to us. This is our daughter. Carrie has been on many of these trips, and she's been hauled on them since she was a baby. And she often, or you rather, Carrie, often woke up after a long car ride in the canoe out in the wilderness and had your head bopped by Spanish moss or whatnot. And I think one of those very trips was that I liked so much was when we took you into Sweetwater Creek, which is a north flowing creek in the Roanoke Basin, flows north into the Roanoke River. And your poor sleepy self woke up only to be thwacked by Spanish moss. And I think you said something like, "Where on earth are we?" Favorite trips? We've taken so many, and it's really, you know, the one you were just on is the best there was. And in addition, it's just it's a great collection of memories of wonderful activities.
I think we just have to say the coastal plain is our favorite. There's so many beautiful places.
Thank you for asking, Carrie.
This is Bob Anthony. I'm glad to hear Apple Hill couple about the mushrooms. Like, how did you taste any of them?
No. no mushroom tasting. No, we don't even do that here in our own woods. But those dune mushrooms were pretty dry and leathery. They were very tough creatures growing on those dunes. So I'm not sure they would be good eating material anyway. However you looked at them, they're a Melaleuca variety.
Yeah, Pat Garber of Ocracoke, who's written very fine works about that natural area. She identified them for us because we didn't know what we were looking at.
Okay.
Are there any other questions at this time?
Let me ask you, you may have said it at the beginning and I missed the first part. Did you take all these photographs in black and white? You use a large format camera, or how did you do this?
Hi, Paul. I just use a 35 millimeter camera. And when we first started doing these books, it was film. And I've since segued into the digital world. And so, yes, a lot of these are taken in color now and converted to black and white, but some we take in black and white as the original photographs. Yep. I really love black and white. I think with our next book, we're moving away from that, but I just think there's something about the light and shadow in a black and white photograph that engages your imagination. You fill in the colors for yourself, and you just pay attention to detail, I think, sometimes a lot more in a black and white photograph.
Agreed.
Hey, Ann, there is a question from someone on Facebook Live. Hugo wants to know if you scout your locations in advance for lighting and such.
I wish. This is these trips are make the best of what you've got when you're there, for the most part. We don't often have the luxury of scouting locations. Sometimes we do, but usually the time of day and the place is just do it where you are, whether it's high noon or the beautiful 5, 6 in the afternoon sunset light, like on this this oak tree here.
Yes, we had been to Lucan's Island. We did kind of scout that because we were out there in the midday on a cloudy day and in kayaks, and Ann said, I want to come back here, because I said I would really love some pictures of this cemetery. And she said, well, then we need to come back. We need to come back on a sunny day, and we should do it in the late afternoon. And so we kind of accidentally scouted that. With Google Earth, you can scout lots of things these days, but you have to be aware of what, when the Google Earth car was moving around and what time of day. But yeah, as Ann says, mostly it was just when we could make a trip.
Yes.
And it would just have to be catch as catch can.
Yeah. One of the first photograph that we started with at the Pasquotank with the duckweed on the water, that was a completely rainy day. It was my birthday, and we were out all day in the rain on the Pasquotank, but came back with some pretty lovely color saturated pictures. So I was pleased with the day ultimately, but it wouldn't have been my choice of the time to go out there.
There's one last question I see in the chat. The comment is, the photos are fabulous, and do you provide the descriptions in the book as well? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about the structure of the book?
Yes.
I think we just named them.
We name them, but they're in the book, they're usually in context. So they're associated with a chapter that tells you about the landscape, not so much about that photograph itself in every case, but it does tell you about the setting and the larger landscape that the photograph was taken in.
Very good. Well, thank you again, Ann and Bland, for taking the time and sharing this really, really neat piece with us and taking us on the tour of Eastern North Carolina. Really appreciate that very much. And thanks to everyone in attendance today. I do have a very exciting invitation for everyone who can hear me talking right now. A week from tomorrow is June 20th, and it is the summer solstice. And at 6:20 p.m., we are going to have our first ever online fundraiser. Even though it's free to attend, you do need to sign up via Zoom, because it will be held as a webinar. And you can do that at our website, coastallandtrust.org/solstice. And it'll be an opportunity for you to join us for a short and sweet virtual stroll through some of our very favorite preserves And you'll hear why so many of these places are so special. And some of them will be different than the ones you heard about today, even though all of Eastern North Carolina is very special. So I hope that you'll join us. So go to coastallandtrust.org/solstice to sign up and grab your spot. Also, we have a very full slate of little lunch lectures for the whole summer, basically planned already. The next two, though, I will point out, next Friday, AmeriCorps service members that are serving in environmental groups here in the Wilmington area will be sharing about their experiences in 2019 and 2020. And on June 26th, we have rescheduled last week's that unfortunately didn't work out. So Sarah Crate from the Longleaf Alliance will share bringing back longleaf on the 26th of June. We will take July 3rd off and then get back in July and August to our little lunch lectures. So thanks again for being here. Look forward to seeing you on Friday and Saturday next week. And y'all take care and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Bye.